But tonight he's going to give us a talk on somebody I think people should be more familiar with, James Clerk Maxwell, who, well, as David will explain, probably the main originator of radio, as he'll talk about. We generally think of probably Marconi, but I think Maxwell probably is the main driver for the science of electromagnetic radiation at radio wavelengths. So I'll pass it over to David.
Right, thank you, Evan. Yep. And I certainly enjoyed the pre-talk chatter with the cats, which was really good. I'm actually in Scotland, so I'm about 130 miles north of you, in the county of Dumfries and Galloway. So what I'm going to do now, hopefully, the technology will work. I'm going to share my screen. Well, tonight's talk, as Evan was saying, is about James Clerk Maxwell, and not so much on his equations, but asking the general question, why isn't he more famous? Why isn't he better known throughout the general public? And also his other achievements. You know, the focus tends to be on his 4 equations, and the prediction of electromagnetic waves, which included light and radiated heat. But we're going to have a look. There was more to this man than just the 4 equations. Having said that, the 4 equations, in my opinion, were the pinnacle of his relatively short life. But I think it'll be interesting to find out a little bit more about this man. If you want to have a look at more in the way of his 4 equations, the RSGB at 8 had, I think her name was Kirsten McIntyre, and she went through the equations. It's about a 45-minute RSGB clip, but if you're interested, you can go there. Right then, this should take about 30 minutes, if that's okay, giving us time for questions and answers, and I will do my best to field those. Okay then. Certainly in the realms of popularity, notoriety, people will recall Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein recently. And these have had profound impact on our lives and the way that we look at sciences, etc. And those are two examples of the formulas, which is force equals mass times acceleration, and Albert Einstein's E equals mc squared. And I think generally people understand what they are. When we take a look at Maxwell's equations, the 4 equations, you know, I think people kind of just cloud over to some extent, because it's using mathematical terms that we don't necessarily immediately grasp. And there's these things called D, B, E, H. What are they all about? So I think in some respects, parking that aside, we'll take a look at James, and also intertwine that with my story as well, why I became interested in James Clerk Maxwell. Having said that, amongst his peers, he's held in high regard. And in a 2013 Guardian newspaper, James Clerk Maxwell, Albert Einstein, and Richard Feynman were listed in the top 10 physicists of all times. And here we've got 2 of them who have given statements regarding the work that James Clerk Maxwell did, particularly his 4 equations. So he's held in high regard amongst his peers. So why did I come into this? And I'm going to talk about my little story just for a while before we kind of return back to James Clerk Maxwell. So I took an Open University master's degree quite a few years ago now. And in my penultimate year, I took electromagnetism. And this brought me, this was the first instance in my kind of career, academic career as well, that I came to try and grasp Maxwell's equations and and other things past that, which was about propagation, lossless propagation, and how we have reflections and absorption of electromagnetic waves. And I'll admit now, this was a very, very difficult course for me. And I was glad to see the back of it, to be honest. But you know, that's the way a lot of these things go, particularly when you're doing academic studies. However, a few years later, this was in 2004, I was in a town called Castle Douglas, which is probably about 20-25 minutes away, and I called into a bookshop, and just perusing through, not really interested in any particular magazine or that. Suddenly I came across this book, The Man That Changed Everything, by Basil Mann. And I picked it up and had a look, and I thought, well, I'll buy the book, knowing nothing about Maxwell at all. And I went to the desk to check out, and the bookseller said, "Oh, are you going to visit his grave?" I had no idea he was from this neck of the woods. So I was guided to a village about 20 minutes away from Castle Douglas, to a very small village. I think it's got a row of 7 cottages on the main road. And I was told to meet a guy called Sam Callender. And Sam had devoted his years, or well, most of his life actually, to promoting James Clerk Maxwell. And I hope you can see it there in the bottom photograph on the right-hand side. You can just see Sam there. He was in his 80s when I met him, and I was astonished he was up a ladder cleaning the gutter out, and which completely amazed me. I was taken back. Really nice guy. He had postcards. He also had a visitor's book, and when I flicked through this visitor's book, I was astonished there were people from all over the globe, from America, continental Europe, Australia, professors, doctorates, etc., had all signed this book. And Sam said, well, if you go across the road, just 100 yards back up the road, you can see where James Clerk Maxwell and his family are buried in the church. Before you get into the church, Sam Callender had been instrumental in having this, raising the funds and having a plaque made for James Clerk Maxwell, and this is outside the church, and it gives details basically of his basic achievements. Now, within the current church, there's what they call the old kirk, which was the church that predated, and it's actually in the graveyard, and it's not very large, maybe 15 meters long, by 8 meters wide. It doesn't have a roof anymore. It's just got the walls, and you walk through, and there's the grave of James Clerk Maxwell. His father's there, his mother Frances, and later his wife joined him. They lived not far away in a place called Glenlair, which is in the countryside. Due to a fire during the 1920s, a good portion of the, I suppose, stately home, for want of a better word, had been destroyed, including all Maxwell's laboratories, workshop areas as well. So a lot of the historical items have been lost in fire. But continuing my story, I read the book and got more information. 4 years later, we were on holiday and we visited the big island in Hawaii. The Kilauea, which is, there are two volcanoes, Mauna Kea, which is dormant, and Kilauea, which is practically active all the time. When we arrived, there was the volcanic fog, which shrouded most of the island at the time. But we took, with a party of others, a vehicle up to Mauna Kea, which is something like, I don't know, 4,000 meters, 13,500 feet, I think, or a little more. And it's strewn with observatories. And to my astonishment, there's a James Clerk Maxwell telescope up there. And at the time, it was the largest sub-millimeter telescope in the world, operating in the 325 to 375 gigahertz spectrum, and it was studying stellar dust and gases. So, you know, I was starting to think, you know, that certainly from an astronomical point of view, James is regarded in quite a high way in terms of this telescope, and as we shall follow on from this, other aspects of his influence, and in fact, the telescope is run by Cambridge University, of which James was a professor when the technological physics side opened during the latter end of the 19th century. So what I'm going to do now is I realized when I did this about 4 years ago, to cram someone's life into half an hour or even an hour, you cannot do anyone any justice. So what I've done is I've tried to condense this into manageable parts of his life, to give you a flavour of where he came from, what he achieved, and how that kind of impacted in terms of his studies and the prolific amount of technical papers that he produced as well. So James was born in 1831 in India Street in Edinburgh to John and Francis, his father and mother. He was an only child, but he was well loved. The Clark family, his father was originally John Clark, had a long history of being in kind of, I suppose, the middle to high society within Scotland. Branches of the family were landowners, particularly the Maxwell estate, which covered a vast area of Ayrshire at its peak. But due to mismanagement over several centuries, land was sold off and the estate shrunk. But in 1833, his father inherited the Maxwell estate, and he hyphenated his name. So that's where we get James Clerk Maxwell from. And he moved to Glenlair in Scotland, where his father became laird. And that's where the early years of James was actually fostered. As a child, living up in the countryside of Ayrshire, Dumfries and Galloway, he was very inquisitive always wanted to know how things worked. He was fascinated with light, and he would take shiny objects like mirrors, pots and pans from the kitchen. And when the sun was out, he was fascinated with the reflections of light. And that would stay with him for basically his whole life. He was home taught by his mother. So there was no schooling, basically up to the age of about 8, when his mother passed away at the age of 48. And this had a devastating effect on the family, as you can well imagine. So from 1841, John Clerk Maxwell and young James, moved back to Edinburgh for a while, where James attended the Edinburgh Academy in Scotland. And at the age of 14, he produced his first mathematical paper on oval curves. And I've got a little diagram there. And I think we've all done it at one stage, where we put 2 pins into a piece of card with a loop of string and a pencil, and we can draw various ellipses and ovals depending on where we place the pins, and also how we arrange the string as well. And he submitted this at the age of 14, but because of his age, it was never presented to the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and it was reviewed by a local mathematician. But even so, this showed at the age of 14 his ability to break new ground. From there, in 1847, he went to the Edinburgh University, which was another stepping stone in his academic career. He had a very good grasp of mathematics, and this was to be the kind of underpinning for his career. 3 years later, he passed the entrance exam for Trinity College, Cambridge, and was accepted. Whilst he was at Cambridge, later in 1855, he did some work on Faraday's lines of force, and this was the start of his work towards unifying the electric and magnetic fields that had been witnessed and experimented on since the turn of the 1800s. By this stage, we see that young Maxwell is about 24 years old. Michael Faraday was born in 1791, so he's already in his 60s. So you can see the age gap between the two. However, they struck up quite a good relationship. So this was the young protege, should we say, with the experience of Michael Faraday, who documented everything precisely. He was a really staunch, I would say, scientist, noting everything step by step. And it was his chronicles, by and large, that helped Maxwell to develop the theories. So at the stage of the mid 1850s, James Clerk Maxwell was able to secure himself a place at Marischal College in Aberdeen, Scotland, and he got the title of Professor of Natural Philosophy at the age of 25. Natural philosophy was a term at the time about trying to understand nature's mechanisms. We would probably call it physics now. And it was during this time that he undertook perhaps one of the most profound pieces of work of his time. And that was to do with Saturn's rings. And since Galileo built his first telescope and was one of the very first to observe Saturn and its rings. Speculation for centuries have been about, well, what are these rings made of? Are they solid? Is it in a disk form? You know, is it water? You know, what is it? And in 1858, for his work on Saturn's rings, and it was actually the stability of Saturn rings, he did a proof mathematically that the rings could only be made up of individual particles. And a solid ring could not exist, wouldn't be stable enough, would actually disintegrate. And he won the Adams Prize for his work. And it would be 120 years after this work that NASA's Pioneer programs in the late 70s, early 80s, and the Cassini probe that had a very close flyby of the rings actually proved the work that Maxwell had done was correct, that the rings are made up of various sizes of individual particles. In recognition of Maxwell, and this is going back to the telescope on board on top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, the Arecibo radio telescope undertook a radar imaging of Venus from Puerto Rico, and they found a large mound as a feature on Venus. Obviously, with the Venus's very thick atmosphere, we're unable to see the surface, but the radar brought out this prominence, and they named it the Maxwell Montes. The convention that's been adopted for Venus is that all features on Venus are named after females. And in fact, this is the only instance of an object or a feature on Venus being named after a male. Saturn and its rings, as we've just said with this paper of 1858, in recognition, there is a ring. Actually, Saturn's rings are made up of many, many rings. And Saturn rings, there's what's called a ringlet. It's a ring of particles which are about 170,000 kilometers in diameter, but it's only 5 meters wide. And that's been named the Maxwell ringlet, and it sits between two other rings, naturally, and it's also called a Maxwell gap. So again, in recognition of his work about electromagnetism, propagation, etc., use of radar, and also his work on Saturn's rings, these are aspects that keep his name in the astronomical community alive. His work continued on at pace. From Marischal College in Edinburgh, he had to move. Primarily it was because there was a kind of a slimming down and there was one too many professors. So he returned, so he got a posting again as a professor in 1860, and he continued his work on a number of things. I mentioned about his fascination with light and colour. He produced the first colour photograph. This was of a piece of tartan, and what he did was he took 3 separate photographs at the time, and each one had one of the 3 primary colours as a filter in front of it. So he took those and then recombined them with the filters, producing the natural colours. He was a little bit fortunate in able to do this. It was to do with ultraviolet light and the colour of the tartan. However, he did produce this colour, which he presented to the London Society, and people were quite fascinated by it. He continued the work of Faraday, and he was never a man to kind of take things for himself. So we always used reference to Faraday and his work. So we see in continuing, he tended in terms of the electromagnetism to work and refine his theories. And as new mathematical treatments were coming along, new mathematical formulas, which were not necessarily related to electromagnetism, he was able to use these new mathematical approaches to refine and develop his understanding and bringing together unifying electrical and magnetic forces. In addition to that, Great Britain was probably at its peak in terms of its Commonwealth, with its outposts right across the globe. The sun never sets on the British Empire, I think it used to say. And it was keen also, because of the development of telegraphy, to link all these parts of the globe via telephone lines, telegraph, to be more precise. But there was one problem. We're not at the stage yet where we've defined what a volt is, what current is, and what electrical resistance is. We have terms for them at this stage, but we have no units as such, or no recognized standard units. So we worked with a number of, he worked with industry, because one of the things that they needed to do was when cables were being made, they needed to have a specification. And there was no way of developing a specification that was able to specify the electrical resistance of cables. And furthermore, not only that, but being able to test cables to ensure that they were compliant with the specification. So it produced something akin to a moving coil meter, which involved a coil and a magnet, and current flowing through the coil, deflecting a suspended magnet in the middle of the field. And by the deflection of the magnet, you could work out the resistance. So these devices were made, sent to the various manufacturers, and that enabled the manufacturers to meet the specifications for the new cables. The dynamical theory of electromagnetic fields. This is at a point where basically Maxwell is saying, well, look, the mathematics are driving me in this direction, and that electromagnetic fields can propagate through space. They don't need a conductive medium. And light and radiated heat is one of the same things. So therefore, if light and heat can be propagated from the sun to reach the earth, then electromagnetic waves can also do the same. This kind of split the community. It was new. The mathematics associated were quite new in terms of the approach. And I believe at the time, according to my understanding of readings, there were probably only about 18 people, academics, in the UK that could actually grasp what Maxwell was actually producing. During 1865, Maxwell returned back to the, I suppose, the stately home, Glenlair. This was primarily due, he'd had a riding accident, and he'd suffered a almost a form of septicemia, which could have killed him. So he retired to convalesce back in Scotland, but continued his work there. And there are just 4 of them. I'll just bring your attention to 2 of them, which is Governors and his paper on hills and dales. So Governors then were mechanical devices to stabilize the speeds of steam engines and motors, and basically consisted of a rotary assembly with 2 weights, and as they spun, centrifugal forces forced these weights out, and they were used to control steam to valves and were able to regulate the speed of steam engines. But he had a look at this, and he actually produced a paper which was the first analysis of control systems. And basically, these governors were negative feedback. You know, they brought stability and control. And this was quite revolutionary at the time. But the paper sat on the academics' library in Cambridge. And it was only in beginning of the war, the Second World War, that they were looking for systems where they can control gun replacements and trajectories, etc. And they were able to pick Maxwell's work up off the shelf, and there were the equations about control systems. And of course, that developed after the war. But he was the first to actually identify these systems as a control system, a closed loop negative feedback control system. On something completely different, whilst he was up in Scotland, which is like kind of very soft rolling hills and valleys, he did a paper on hills and dales. And again, he took a mathematical approach to this because he was fascinated with the topography of the land features, such as hills, valleys, what we call passes, ridges and troughs. And he produced a paper which modelled these. And in fact, later, probably I think about 50 or 60 years later, it was picked up by the meteorologists. And in fact, some of the mathematics which described how the hills, valleys and ridges related to each other fitted nicely with predicting the weather. And in fact, today we'll find that, ridges of high pressure, a trough, using words that Maxwell had used in his hills and dales. So those are, kind of spin-offs with his fascination, picking something up, analysing it, producing a mathematical treatment to it, and then it being found to be useful sometimes later on. In 1871, he returned back to the Cavendish laboratory. He was actually asked to return to it. And he was heavily involved in the development of what was called the Cavendish laboratory. And it was purposely put together for the new line of physics that was developing. And it was a hub really for the best minds in the country at that time. So he had his hands full in terms of what he had to do in preparation, setting it out, the style, the kind of experiments that were likely to take place. So he was very hands-on in doing this, as well as continuing on his work on other things, culminating in his treatise on electricity and magnetism. He was involved in purchasing the apparatus down to the benches, ensuring there was good ventilation for the various experiments. And I think he took some of this from the work he'd done when he was back home in Glenlair. He'd brought that back down with him. So he'd actually created a small laboratory and working areas whilst he was back up in Scotland. And I think he used that to model it on a larger scale at Cambridge University. He was involved in the administration. So he was very much hands-on. And he kept going, even though in 1877 he started to develop abdominal pains. And he would continue his lectures. And he did that almost up to his passing in 1879, November the 5th, where he succumbed basically to stomach cancer. And quite ironically, that's what his mother died of at the age of 48 also. So it would have been some sort of hereditary passing down of the genes. Surprisingly, in this year, a young Albert Einstein was born in 1879. And if you remember back to, I think, the second slide, where one epoch started and a new one began, I think that is reference to the fact that there was a common sharing between Maxwell and Einstein. So I know that's been kind of quite quick, but I hope it kind of gives you just a little bit of flavour. There's lots of books out there, and good YouTube videos regarding the four equations, but very rarely do we get a chance just to have a look, just remove that veil, just get a feel for where you are. In fact, I'm about 25 minutes away from Maxwell's stately home, which is privately owned now. And I think it's called the Clerk Maxwell at Cossock Trust. So there's a trust now associated with it. And they're renovating the site to try and bring it back to some sort of standard that Maxwell would have recognised. So yeah, so his early death was unfortunate. I suppose he was on the cusp of greatness. 48 is still quite young. From what I can gather, he was still going at full pace in terms of his work ethic, his workload, etc. And who would have known what would have happened if it had lived longer? And I thought, going back to again the second slide in terms of why is Einstein and Isaac Newton better known outside physics from Maxwell, and I've drawn a few things from my own point of view about this. And we know that Newton gave us gravity, and also how this kind of fits together as regards the planets, the solar system, and the universe at large. And then Einstein gave us relativity, which is about time and space, which was new. But also, these two men were also celebrities of their age. Isaac Newton was quite often, he circled with royalty, with the elite, the rich. Albert Einstein, having moved to America later in his life, was central to physics, and we see him with his wild hair, and his famous photograph, which I used on the second slide, where he's sticking his tongue out. So there was something about these two people. However, Clerk Maxwell lived in an academic world, almost an academic bubble, and his focus was on, exploring the world around us and developing and fitting jigsaw pieces so that there was a better understanding. And it's interesting that it's only after his passing that his work has been recognised. We have Hertz, who undertook experiments during the 1880s to kind of detect the Maxwellian waves, which he did after about 5 years of experimentation. And he was able to confirm the existence of, propagation, basically. And from that, we see a very quick, rapid expansion of focus in this area, culminating in Marconi's famous transmissions around about the 1900s. And it makes, I was just, wondering about this, this aspect. And I believe Maxwell did provide the catalyst to move forward. And he was able to unify the electromagnetic aspects, which have been fascinating people, static electricity initially, certainly as far back as the ancient Greeks, when they would rub amber on wool, and you get that electrostatic crackle. And in fact, the Greek for amber is where we get the word electron and electronics. So we tend to see our developments nowadays, which are, we are now living in an electromagnetic environment. No matter where we go, nowadays it pervades everything that we do, particularly our hobby. I'm using Wi-Fi here to connect myself to a router. I've then got a microwave link between my place here to send to link me to the internet. So it's all around us, but we're taking it for granted. But without Maxwell's equations, we wouldn't have been able to design these things because they are able to tell us every aspect of the electromagnetic phenomenon in terms of reflection, polarization, absorption, propagation, etc. Covers a whole wide things once you start to open up the equations. And as I was putting this final bit together, I thought to myself, well, in terms of his life, what would have happened if James Clerk Maxwell had lived to the age of Isaac Newton, who lived to the age of 84? Maxwell would have been around during Hertz's experiments. Maybe those experiments may have taken place at Cavendish in Cambridge. Who knows? Certainly been around for the first transmissions, first radios. So he would have seen a great deal of change, and it would have been around for Einstein's theory. In terms of, I think it was I think he did the photoelectric effect at the beginning of the 20th century. So he would have been able to sit back and not necessarily boast, but appreciate what contribution he had made to not only electromagnetism, but also the wilder field. And we've been talking about control systems, light, photography. It's quite extensive and broad. So that kind of concludes where we are, perhaps a bit longer than I expected. I do apologise. I hope you found the talk interesting, and if you've any questions, I'll do my best to kind of answer them for you.
All right. Well, thanks very much for that, David. Really interesting. I certainly have some questions and comments, but I'll ask anyone else first if they want to make a comment or ask something of David.
Go on, Tom. I'm sure you've got something to say.
Well, basically, thank you very much, David. In fact, that was a fantastically interesting thing, because basically I went to Edinburgh University and did 2 years of physics. I did a chemistry degree, but I did 2 years of physics and actually in the second year, which was largely based on electricity and magnetism, and Maxwell's stuff was referred to many times in the course of that course that I was doing. You know, he's not been forgotten in academic circles. I think he's actually a little bit more appreciated now, I think, than he was even when I was at uni. Actually, he's become more to the fore because people realize, in fact, that his work, in fact, people like Einstein said, you know, important people grow up by standing on the shoulders of giants, and he always reckoned that Clerk Maxwell was his mentor. You know, during his rise through his career. So, you know, you've got somebody like Einstein who appreciated Clerk Maxwell. Anyway, that was what I wanted to say. Thanks very much. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Go on, Evan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll find my 2 pennies.
Sorry, just wanted to add. It was interesting going through to find out about Maxwell, how much was recognisable but not attributed in my own mind to him. So it's nice to be able to make that link. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I think there's one other thing, actually, David, I would say, and that is, you know, Maxwell, when he wrote his equations down, we don't actually express them mathematically in physics like that anymore. They've been developed by people that followed on from him to make them more easily manipulatable by mathematicians and physicists. And his equations sometimes look a bit odd when you see them written on paper. And maybe that's one of the reasons. It's something similar to what happened with people like Isaac Newton and stuff. You know, what they proposed originally, while correct, didn't quite fit in. As the years go by, they get developed and stuff and change slightly. You know, to make it more amenable to maths, because there's a tremendous tie-up between mathematics and physics.
Yeah,
it's all physics. All
and in fact, his original papers, I think they consisted of, I think it was 14 equations, and after his death, another pioneer, Oliver Heaviside,
Heaviside, yes.
And he actually condensed them down into the 4 equations that we see
Correct.
today.
That's right. Yes. We've got a member of the radio club. He's actually unfortunately not around with us anymore. He's still in the club, but in fact he's disabled, so he doesn't come anymore. Peter Singleton, but Peter goes on over Oliver Heaviside all the time. Actually, I think he's in the Heaviside School of Physics. I'm more in the Clerk Maxwell School of Physics. Yeah.
The fascinating thing about Oliver Heaviside, he was self-taught.
Yes, that's right.
You know, so he learned mathematics himself from books, and that, which makes him extraordinary.
I know he was. There's no question about it. Heaviside has got his place in physics, in modern physics. Yes, that's right.
But
Yes.
I also think he was like Maxwell. He probably shunned all the unwanted publicity in favour of his studies, rather than actually kowtowing to the the elite on things he wasn't interested in. So yeah, so a classic scientist. Stick to what you know, not what you want to.
I tell you, most of these, Peter, absolutely, most of these guys, in fact, are looked upon as being more like sort of cranks and outsiders of one kind or another, and tend to be shunned by normal people.
Does the word geek come into that?
Absolutely, the word geek
is that quickly followed by amateur radio enthusiasts?
amateur radio people. We fit into that bracket as well. Yes.
It's funny you say that, because there's a tradition of that amongst quite a lot of science, quite a lot of more ancient people involved in physics and chemistry. People like Robert Boyle, for example. I can give straight away, he was rubbished by all of his peers because it was a completely new way of thinking.
Correct. Yes.
There's a big tradition about that amongst science. So.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, Dave. That was I loved that. Actually, I can't speak for anybody else, but I loved your talk. Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else? Anyone else?
We're holding you back, Evan.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I think I think the age of these sort of the age of Maxwell and people like that, where individuals, and the Heaviside, can make theories up, just by themselves, and sometimes with very little training. That era is probably over, because things are just so complex now, really, aren't they? Which is a bit unfortunate. And you've also got the bureaucratization of science. I think with research councils and all this sort of stuff, peer review, which is another word for groupthink, in my opinion. And so, it's hard to sort of have these sort of mavericks and that these days, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know, but just something on just the difference between someone like Newton and also probably someone like William Herschel, who discovered planet Uranus and infrared radiation. They sort of did their science by observation, whereas Einstein and Maxwell, it came from inside their head. And I think for anyone sort of trying to sort of, certainly Einstein stuff, I mean, he didn't get the Nobel Prize for the theory of relativity, did he? I mean, people just didn't understand it. They just didn't get it. And I think similarly with Maxwell, and I think the thing is as well with electromagnetic radiation, it's very abstract. And I think we were talking about this at the convention, the RSGB convention, was that certainly school kids, you can show them the rings of Saturn through a telescope and think, oh, wow, that's really good. But radio is very, it's the ether, really. And I guess things like the spectrum analyzers and that, when you can visualize it, makes it a bit more better. But radio, I think, generally, and this is, I think, why Hertz and Marconi probably are the more famous people, is because they made it practical and people could see the results. Whereas Maxwell sort of had his equations, and it was all theoretical. And I think with regards to the fame, with Einstein, he became sort of a famous in an era of fame, with photography, and he had his funny hair, and presumably after the atomic bomb stuff, people sort of knew him because of that. So just one last thing, the stuff about the standing on the shoulders of giants, the story behind that was why Newton said that. I gather because I'm on the shoulder of giants. He had to go at Robert Hooke, who was a hunchback. Robert Hooke being another astronomer, at the time, and having a little slight dig, because really Newton was a bit of an a-hole, really, as a person.
No. He wasn't a bit of one. He was amazing. Having done some work,
terrible.
Having done some work as part of my dissertation from my master's on early Royal Society, Robert Hooke was the first secretary of the society, and Robert Hooke was the apprentice of Robert Boyle, and apprentice and assistant. So everyone highly valued Robert Boyle. In fact, it was even said in the early minutes of the society that everyone's got to have at least one of his books. Whereas Newton was something else. I mean, he wouldn't write in English. Principe was written in Latin. He was very much about the elite, and he worked in those circles as well. So that was very much his audience. He wasn't really interested in common people and this, that, and the other, but he was perfectly willing to go out and destroy people's reputations, and that's exactly what he did when it came to Robert Hooke.
Yeah.
One point I would raise, having this is the original book that I bought 20 odd years ago, and I've read other ones. There's a good one by the IET and the IEEE as well, that have looked at his life. Nothing comes out of it that says he was a humble man, very religious. He would spend time, he wrote poetry as well. He was, even though he didn't have any family, him and his wife never had any children, he was in a position whereby he was the laird of the Glen Lair estate up in Dumfries and Galloway here. So therefore, he helped run that as well. So he had income coming to him. So he was in a privileged position from a wealth point of view that he didn't need to worry too much. And that's why he was able to kind of set up a laboratory and workshops up in Scotland and continue his work whilst he was away. But nothing comes out of any of the things I've read that would say he was a geek. He was a very humble, very quiet, very religious man.
There's quite a lot of truth in that with, again, early natural philosophers. I know that there are certain ones which are incredibly religious as well as being interested in this new form of science. And as I say, in the case of Robert Boyle, he was the subject of my dissertation. Even wrote a discourse on swearing. He was the kind of person he did. So they weren't just limited to what they were investigating. They were interested in all aspects of philosophy more than anything else, because it was natural philosophy at the time. It certainly wasn't science per se.
Just when we did a sort of dry run, David, a few nights ago, just to test the Webex for your presentation. One of the things I think when I was blabbering on, just on the difference between, say, does Maxwell dealing with Saturn and as well as theoretical stuff? You sort of ask people what's the main achievement of the Jodrell Bank telescope, and I'd say 99% of people who could give an answer would probably say, tracking Sputnik. They don't understand really what certainly radio astronomy is about. I mean, it's electrons going through relativistic fields, magnetic relativistic speeds through magnetic fields. That's what it's about, and doesn't really sound very sexy, does it? And again, it's just very abstract.
I think one of the things I find is that when I was doing electromagnetism, I had a job, I was raising a family, so there's a lot going on, and you do what you can to get through the course, so
yes,
you learn things kind of parrot fashion.
Oh yes.
In the interim, what I've been able to do by researching Maxwell and looking at his equations, I now look at the equations and I don't see symbols. What I do see is what the symbols means in terms of what the field's doing. So I have a visual picture of what the field's doing, and that helps you to understand, what it's all about. But that's come after I graduated.
Well, it's interesting. That's something I did see the other day. You mentioned Faraday was was born 1791, I think you said. I mean, he probably should be I guess, the real father of radio, given that all that radio waves is just AC current that goes into the space. But also that's the same year Samuel Morse was born. So it's 135 years for both of them next year. So it's, just sort of uncanny that these sort of dates come up. Like you said, Einstein was born the same year that Maxwell died.
Yeah.
It's just them moving into one different generation.
Yeah.
There has been some stuff about Maxwell. There was a TV thing recently. I don't know about recently, but it was on a mainstream channel.
I was about coffee, Evan.
What's that?
About coffee.
I can't hear you.
That was about coffee.
He's being cheeky, Evan. He's thinking he's telling you about Maxwell House coffee.
Explaining a terrible joke there, Tom.
Oh yeah, God.
It was a terrible joke, actually. It's not worthy of you, that.
No. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he is sort of known, in places, and it's just one of these things that it's just too theoretical, I think, for to be really quite famous, and not really as charismatic, I guess. Newton had his sort of funny hair, so did Einstein, and I don't know.
I don't know if Dave would agree with me, but actually, because he was the one who proposed the founding experiments, the founding equations for the electromagnetic theories. In actual fact, as time passed, they were modified and made more usable by following people who followed up behind him. So in actual fact, some of the stuff that he said, if you actually saw it written down, and I mean, I haven't read that much about him, but basically he's not so easily translatable unless you look at it in the words of people who follow on behind him. I don't know if you agree with that, Dave.
Yes, at the Cavendish laboratories at Cambridge, I think he had a team of about 34. Academics, scientists, who were well into what he was doing. And it was from that group that his work became more manageable. And of course, they had to teach others about it as well. Because even over 150 years since he produced some of these things, I had difficulty, with the mathematics.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, I got a pass mark for my electromagnetism, where other subjects had done pretty well, But it was a very challenging course.
I can empathise with that. I can very much empathise with that. I remember my in one of my exams just turning around and saying, actually, I'm not quite sure. It wasn't this particular subject. I just remember it. So I don't understand this at all, but my maths is good enough to make pass this course. So I did.
Yes. Yes.
I don't think it wasn't this. I think actually it was quantum mechanics too. But even so, it was a similar kind of subject, which is maths heavy, and it's just. But unless you understand how to do the maths, you'll never be able to do the science.
Yeah. Going back to a thing you were saying about Evan and about Faraday, he got it well into electromagnetic induction and was able to produce a rudimentary AC motor. And I think it was Gladstone who he met, and I think he was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time. He wasn't Prime Minister. So he'd been invited with a lot of other dignitaries to witness this electromagnetic effect and things like that. So Gladstone said, "What good, you know, is this electromagnetism that you've come across, that your thing, and what, how can it benefit us?" And Faraday says, "Well, I don't know really." I says, "But wherever it is, you'll be able to tax it." So, so I think that's quite a common trait of people who are into pure research and development without actually knowing what an end point could be.
Yes, I agree with you there totally. Yeah,
it's surprising. I mean, with wireless, how very few, like even the military, sort of said, "Oh, well, that might be useful for ships or something like that," but never really took the ball and ran with it until some time later.
Well, it's all private, wasn't it? Even up until quite, the early 20th century, it's still all privately run, most of the radio systems. All the wireless operators were basically employees of the Marconi company.
Mm. Yeah. You think these days, the defence, complex sort of grabs most of the science, particularly regarding RF. Total inversion. Yeah, it's. I think, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, with radio, certainly with the military. I mean, the thing is, as soon as you're talking about the sea naval stuff, as soon as you put the key down and you emit something, you give away your position, basically. And the less you chatter, the better. It's so easily tracked and DF'd and all the rest of it.
It's all satellite though now. I've got a colleague who used to be in the Royal Navy, and most of it's all satellite now.
The Chinese can blow them up, can't we? I don't know if that's that's good or bad.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that funnily the military is rediscovering HF, as I understand. For these reasons.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're seeing all sorts of new modulation techniques. We're cramming more information into smaller bandwidths. In fact, spectrum licensing and costing is all based around that. You get a chunk of spectrum, and you try and it'll cost you so much, and you try and cram as much information into that space. So modulation techniques continue to develop, and I see that's the way it's going to go.
Well, they do say it takes a war to do with things like that, and at the end of the day, you've got plenty of wars going on at the moment, haven't you, where technology develop. I mean, you only have to look at Russia and Ukraine, don't you?
Just quickly an idea, actually.
Drones have come out of the war, Ukrainian war, and they've become, rather than something that we would get and we would take it up and we would take pictures and videos of the surrounding areas or inspect large structures for any repairs that are required. They now carry out an explosive device, and they're used to hunt down and kill the enemy. And I believe the Iranians have huge facilities where they're building thousands of these things weekly. So,
and they're also very cheap to build.
Yeah,
relatively cheap. Yeah, that's right.
Also, deep space probes and that, which I think a lot of the, you're talking about Pioneer 10 and Voyager and stuff like that, going out to the. I mean, this is more than 50 years ago, isn't it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they had sort of certain modulation types to just so long distance at low power to be maintained.
Yeah, I think Pioneer is about 1 light day away? He's been traveling. Wow. Yeah, I think it's about a light day.
Was that 1972 or something?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a light day, yeah. So,
and when you think of the technology then.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, but yeah, it was primitive compared to what it is now.
Absolutely. You're probably talking something like a ZX Spectrum, really, aren't you?
The Atari ping pong game. Or something.
Absolutely, or the BBC Micro. It's around about that time, isn't it?
What is it? It was legendary that that's what the Russians bought a load of 1K Spectrums to for the flight guidance in their missiles.
Is that what they're still using?
No, there might be. I don't know. Well, originally, that was one of the pretty apocryphal stories that came out because it was so cheap and just something that could be applied.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I just want a question on the Maxwell stuff about control theory. I mean, I just wonder if that is probably one of the bigger progresses that he made. I mean, it is essential, isn't it, for manufacturing, and particularly with fluids. You couldn't have mass production without it, presumably.
Yeah, well, that's correct, and also he looked at the effect of dampening. That's restricting the response of the feedback network.
Yeah.
How that affected the overall control system, where you have overshooting, slower responses, etc.
Yes.
So all that he'd looked at, and as I say, applied the mathematics to it, and then, as I said, beginning of the Second World War, there was the details that allowed them to use the mathematics, because we had at that stage valves and control systems were starting to become more sophisticated at that level, and they were able to apply these into gunnery and range finding.
Yeah.
So
it is heavy mathematics, and when my dad did it, was you wouldn't think of just controlling temperature or pressure along a pipe or something. Was that sort of sophisticated, but obviously was. And yeah, it's the feedback mechanism. How you get that information back so it maintains the level or the temperature, whatever that you want.
Yeah,
easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Autopilots, even a basic autopilot would have there's a control system, isn't it? The plane banks a certain amount, then it banks back to keep a heading, and
that's right.
It's all yeah.
So from the extract of this book here regarding the feedback, amazingly, the work attracted little attention until the 1940s, when control systems were urgently needed for military equipment during the Second World War. Engineers were pleased to find that Maxwell had already worked out the basis of the theory they needed for the control systems. After the war, Norbert Werner took things further and developed the science of cybernetics. So again, the work is a stepping stone for others.
That's right.
Thank you very much, David. It's really appreciated that insight into where we've got to today, and without him, well, I don't know what we'd be using. Well, thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dave, for very interesting talk and also discussion afterwards. I think we've all learned a lot. I thought I sort of knew this guy, but I didn't really. I thought he just was dealt with radio waves, but obviously a lot more. Real Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And
but once again, thank you very much for inviting me along. It's been a pleasure, and it's very good from to get kind of questions and answers and stories as well, which is always helpful.